I moved away from my first home in 2022. I don't know whether it was feeling like I couldn't make it where I was anymore, or a need for something, anything else, but I left that home behind for good. I suppose, maybe, I felt called to go elsewhere, chase some dream or some ideal, make my own way in life. Something in me told me that it was time, that I didn't belong where I was anymore, that I needed to make a home for myself. I visited my first home since then, of course, going back for the holidays and connecting with my family again. And my family, of course, visits me every spring, seeing the new life I've made for myself, rough though it is. But I can't really say I'd ever want to spurn the call and go back there again. It hasn't been an easy journey since then. It's been rough and it's been messy. I've fallen and failed a few times, but every time, it seems I can always manage to pick myself back up again and carry on with the journey. I've doubted myself a lot and wondered many times if I should just give up, but in the end, I never do. This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been mine, and I'm proud of it. I made this life, this home, these connections, this path for myself. I did that. Not just alone, but with help, with others. I've found my tribe and become my own person. And I'm going to continue to do that, probably until my last days on this world, the same as anyone else. Maybe that's why URU resonates with me, though it never did so as much as Myst did. The idea that I'm myself. I've found my own way and traced my own path. I've made a home. It's a reminder that I'm not alone out there, and that I, like all of us out there, will continue to journey onward into the caverns of life, both alone and together, finding a way and making a home. URU Ages Beyond Myst, URU to Dunny, URU The Path of the Shell. These three groups of content, some originally intended for the multiplayer Myst Online URU Live, are together the glue of a standalone version of that online game, and a prologue to it. That ambitious online multiplayer experience has a history that, frankly, deserves its own video, and plenty has been said about it by other people. But the standalone version, what is now called URU Complete Chronicles and placed together as a single-player only bundle game, has often been left less explored. It seems pointless to explore it when the open-source Myst Online URU Live Again now exists, but it still gets positive reviews to this day, and just about any Myst fan you ask will rave about it, calling it a worthy installment in the franchise, despite it technically being a spin-off game and not really meant to be standalone at all. Indeed, at first glance, the standalone URU seems like a cheap cash grab, a cynical attempt by Cyan and Ubisoft to make even more money on a title meant solely to be online only, a relatively forgettable and archival version of an early MMO that was so ambitious it failed twice, only to be revived as an open source game. Some will say that releasing URU and its expansion packs this way was just business, a means to an end to keep the online version alive with further funding. But is that really the truth? Was this really nothing more than a cynical business choice from a struggling indie developer? Or as ever in these games, is there much more beneath the surface to uncover, hidden in the streets of Dunny and lurking in its shadows? URU is a weirdly non-indicative name for a game, isn't it? It means community or gathering in Dunny, and if taken at face value, it reads as URU, emphasizing that you play as yourself. In fact, if you didn't know anything about the Dunny or their language and just saw this game sitting on a store shelf, you might even assume it was a cool-sounding nonsense word meant to match with the rest of the one-word game titles in the series at the time, where the Myst name is relegated to a pre-title. Seriously, I dare you to find me just one fan who prefers to call, for example, Myst 3 Exile anything other than just Exile or Myst 3. Nobody ever uses the full title. But URU, because it's such an oddball word that seemingly means nothing to anyone outside of the fandom, really did need that subtitle reading Ages Beyond Myst in order to connect it to the other games, despite it being a side story that's merely set in the same universe as Myst. URU's story is simple enough at first glance, being an attempted introduction to the online version, a prequel if you will. The story tells of you yourself as a Myst fan and explorer being drawn to the real cleft, situated in the Sonoran Desert near a certain caldera. As you explore, you uncover evidence of Yisha having been there, and are tasked by her to take a journey, her journey, one that led her to her discovery of the Bahro. During this journey, you find yourself learning more about the Dunny and their darker side, their prideful hubris, elements that, in part, led to their fall. You also discover evidence of the Bahro for yourself, even heading into their cave homes which show strange connections to the starry expanse, and bear 4 strange pillars, each of them a piece of their soul. In taking these pillars back to Relto yourself, you're literally taking control of a single Bahro, and in returning them at the end of the game, you are slowly freeing it from enslavement. The implication is that many explorers are on the same journey, doing the same thing, all slowly setting into motion the events of the online version of URU, a game where a Bahro civil war is disrupting the DRC's cavern restoration efforts and causing danger for the explorers there. But the expansion packs, previously online-only content, add more, filling in story gaps that the standalone didn't. In Dunny, you help power up something called the Great Zero and thus activate your key, all while exploring the city proper. And in the Path of the Shell, you trace the steps of another journey, one that's presented in URU Live, discovering that the Dunny had some small knowledge of the Bahro enslavement and uncovering further evidence of their hubris. They are short explorations, but explorations nonetheless, adding a bit more context and answering questions for those who never otherwise got the chance. Indeed, URU isn't like the other games in the Myst Saga in many ways, and that's very purposeful. For one, it's the only game in the franchise where you can play in third person, as a player-made avatar. You can design this character however you want, and even unlock cosmetics for them. Plus, you get your own Relto, an age all to yourself that you can customize with things found on your explorations. You're playing as yourself, not the stranger. They're long dead because URU takes place in the then modern-day 2000s, just after an organization called the Dunny Restoration Committee, or DRC for short, has finally opened a pathway into the Great Cavern. In the game, they've set up dedicated safe zones of exploration, but since you've been called to follow Yisha's journeys as a chill explorer who links to Ages and doesn't afraid of anything, you're not going to let a few orange traffic cones stop you from the truth, are you? By drawing the player into the mysterious world of the lost Dunny civilization like this, URU provides a much different experience from Myst, while also sticking to its adventure game roots. But URU was never supposed to only be a standalone game. It did have the tagline, "Alone or together, find a way, make a home," but it was always meant to be an online co-op game eventually, with the standalone title meant to be a gateway into the online version, and much of the game is designed around this. There's something uniquely interesting that happens when you take ages meant for many people and constrain it to just one person in the third person. The ages become incredibly liminal, perhaps more liminal than any other game before it. And those ages were pretty spooky and liminal to start with, too. For one, you're exploring a dead city and empty worlds, most of them meant as gathering places for people to work, live, play, and thrive in. Even Kadish Talesa, which was meant for just one person as a practical vault age, feels liminal and weird and empty like this. This all cultivates less of a cozy, quiet vibe like Myst or a paranoid sense of loneliness like Riven, and more of a backroom-style feel akin to your typical analog horror scenario, the essence of what most would call liminal. You're all alone amongst giant structures and magnificent inventions. A whole civilization dead and gone at your feet, with you and maybe a few Bahro the only ones left to see it now. Even your Relto feels barren and a bit non-cozy, though you can make it a bit more homey as the game goes on with pages you add to the book. It's got a lot of the same DNA as Myst and Riven before it do, really feeling like it's trying to capture those again. And quite often, it does work and does do that. And, well, of course it does. Cyan did pioneer this sort of liminal, wistful world design, didn't it? However, no game is perfect, and URU is no exception to that rule. Cyan does get a lot right with the ages and the vibe of these spaces, and the story that unfolds within them is grand, weaving the kind of rich show-don't-tell tapestry they staked their name on. But unfortunately, all of this serves only to emphasize the game's flaws, and unfortunately for URU, those flaws are pretty glaring. URU was, first and foremost, not meant to be explored alone. The word Uru in Dunny means community or a gathering, but tragically that idea becomes lost in the standalone version, and everything you find in these ages just proves how lost that idea is. For starters, it's clear the design of these ages are meant to host large numbers of people, not just one. Kadish Talesa and Eater Chemo especially show this issue, clearly meaning to have space for many people. The Dunny City proper especially feels barren, since it's clearly intended to be a major hub, and here the only purpose of it is to do a marker alignment puzzle, solve the Great Zero puzzle, and find some more lore. There's really not much else to do once you've explored everything and found everything in these ages. It's liminal, yes, but not quite the kind of liminality the rest of the games use. While it approaches Myst and Riven levels, it's not as charming as those games, or as unnerving as those games. It's not even as sad as End of Ages, or as paranoid as Exile or urgent as Revelation. Instead, it just feels dead, kind of empty. And whether or not that works for you is going to depend entirely on your feelings about liminal spaces in games and media. Another big issue is that, despite trying to correlate all of the information players of URU Live got into one space, not all of it makes it there. None of the lore dumped on us in this version really answers most of the questions the rest of the series poses, particularly End of Ages. If the standalone URU was your only exposure to this game at the time, you wouldn't know all the details about the Bahro, about Yisha, about the DRC, or any of what occurred in the caverns. It's even missing ages present from the original URU Live, including Minkata and all of the pod ages, because standalone URU was released before that part of the game existed. The result is a hodgepodge half-game version of URU, great for a single reminiscence, but not the complete experience, and something that only tells half the story of the open-source online version. New players will never get that full story. They have to pore through transcripts from fan websites and wikis like the Guild of Archivists, and while that's a great website, that's just no way to experience URU as Cyan meant it to be. And then there's the puzzles. Some of these had to be heavily changed for the standalone version. especially in Garrison, Erkana, Annone, and a few other ages. Most of these puzzles were meant to be done by multiple people, or at least by 2, but since the standalone wasn't online compatible, it meant they had to change the puzzles too. This posed issues mostly with time-based ones like the pellet puzzle, which required multiple people, but in the standalone, takes 15 minutes to set up and another 15 to wait around for, something I'm pretty sure nobody wanted. This also comes off as awkward with other waiting puzzles in the game, and with some real-time elements like how long it takes to climb ladders or walk places. And that's another thing. The jank in this game is real, present, and obvious. WASD-style 3D movement was not common or standard in gaming yet at the time URU was developed, so Cyan opted for mouse and keyboard style tank controls. Yeah, like in Silent Hill or Resident Evil. Tank controls are nice in horror games to help emphasize a feeling of helplessness, but in URU, they just serve as a frustration point. Part of the puzzle is in figuring out the finicky controls and the even more Byzantine key UI, all of which feels needless. If you're used to jumps being more granular like modern games, you'll be very disappointed to find that jumps are a set distance and set speed. You can't control it very well. This leads to some jumps being much more difficult than they realistically should be, which isn't great. I cannot tell you just how many times I struggled trying to make a jump and overshot it when I replayed URU recently. It just feels really bad and really frustrating. And then, of course, what is a game without some bugs? Oh, URU has them, and they're notable. The most glaring one occurs in Garrison and some other ages, when jumping platforms mostly. You see, Cyan made the interesting decision to tie collision on some objects to the computer's frame rate. So, if you had a very strong gaming rig at the time, jumps like the Garrison one could be nearly impossible, because the Explorer would clip and fall through the platform, then panic link back to Relto. This wasn't as big of an issue at the time, because few people had a computer capable of doing that kind of power. But on modern computers, so basically every computer released in the past decade or so, the issue is glaring, and Cyan has never patched it, except in the online version. That means for URU Complete Chronicles, the only solution is to somehow manually throttle the frame rate with something like Fraps, but using outdated software to fix a bug really shouldn't be the solution to such a widely known problem. There's also a bug in the cleft at the start, especially on modern Windows and Mac systems that causes it to crash, and the culprit appears to be something designed to stop piracy. You see, the game had baked-in copy protection as was standard for games at the time, the kind of copy protection based on a very common checksum type algorithm. If a certain value doesn't match, the game is considered to be a pirated copy, and issues would happen with it. Some games simply would fail to boot, while others like URU would crash. Unfortunately for Complete Chronicles, this code was never removed, and because modern systems don't play well with this sort of deprecated copy protection, a crash happens right within the cleft at the very beginning. It can be bypassed, but not without effort, which really sours the whole mood of the game from the start for modern players. So, what to make of all this? Is URU a masterpiece, or a glitchy, janky disaster? Did URU need to be a standalone game at all? Does Dunny, alone or together, truly deserve to breathe again in light of this? Or is it best left off buried? URU Complete Chronicles is a game with great ambitions and a burden on its shoulders, telling a fantastic tale of adventure that really feels like it fits with the rest of the Myst games as a whole. It was a starting point for a new chapter of Myst that tried to craft a whole new realm of possibility, all while bringing it home for people who wanted to experience it all on their own, without needing an internet connection to do it. It's functionally the same base story that leads into Myst Online, alongside some of the game's continued story content. Sure, without all the online events that led into it, the story rings a bit hollow, but it's still got good bones, and still is a relevant, interesting tale about cycles, rebirths, renewal, and finding your way through struggles and hubris. It expands the Dunnyverse in a way that fully connects it to our world, making all of the Myst games really feel real, magical, like things that could actually happen in fantastic worlds filled with interesting people, tantalizingly close to our own. URU is valuable, even in standalone form, because not only does it tell us that we can always find a way and make a home no matter what, and that the ending is never truly written, it also acts as an archival snapshot of what Cyan wanted Myst to become. URU is, in a word, magical. Not just because of what it tries to be and want it to be, but in spite of it. It may have taken me a long time to make this journey and find the cleft for myself, and an even longer time to really appreciate it in context, but I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad I made these ages my own, the same way I did for all of the others in these games. URU changed me. URU shaped me. And in a way, I think URU released my own soul from entrapment, just like that Bahro was released from its pillars. Is it worth playing in this form? I'm not too sure about that, but is it worth playing in any form? Of that, there can be no doubt. I'm sure you'll find the answer for yourself, though, whenever you make your own way to the cleft and into that deep city underneath. Because that, my friend, is one journey I can't possibly prepare you for. Best of luck.